Hi, everybody. Welcome to Let's Humanize the Workplace. My name is Vivian Acquah. I call myself the Inclusive Workplace Wellness Advocate. If you haven't seen the previous episodes of Let's Humanize the Workplace, look it up on LinkedIn or look it up on the hashtag Humanize the Workplace. But today I'm going to do something different, right? I'm already in a different flow, in a different mind. And my guest speakers, can you believe that they were laughing? They were laughing because of the fact that I'm just scrambling here. So let me properly introduce my guest speakers for today. So I have Katee Van Horn, who is a HR strategist, international keynote speaker, focused on global inclusion, diversity, and belonging. She's a former VP of engagement and inclusion of GoDaddy. And she's also the amazing podcast co-host of the Inclusive AF podcast, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank
Which you were a
you.
guest on, which we had
Yeah,
such a great time when you came on as a guest with
definitely.
Jackie and I. So thank
Definitely,
you.
definitely.
And
So also tune into their podcast as well. And then we have Kimberly, who almost ghosted me, but that's a whole nother story, right? So Kimberley John-Morgan is an equity advocate with astounding communication skills, and through her writings, she highlights the discrimination in hiding in plain sight. So definitely follow Kimberly as well. And last but not least, but the brave man amongst the brave man for tonight's conversation is Joe. He calls himself Joe, but I see Joseph Santana. He is the chairman of the CDO Power Circle, creator and host of the ERG Power Talk podcast, author of the new DEI and ERG frontier. Okay, this is a whole mouth words. It seems like I'm scrambling here, but let's start with you, Joe. Why do we need to humanize the workplace?
Well, I think one of the reasons why it's really important to humanize the workplace is because the workplace is rapidly becoming more digitalized,
Mm,
and it's also becoming more fragmented in a number of ways. One is that the workplace itself is becoming distributed. So rather than having the majority of your people reporting to one office or one work site, we now have a multidimensional workplace. It goes beyond being just hybrid because it also includes such things as people that may be working in the same place but not at the same time, or
hmm
people who are not working at the same time or in the same place but yet need to partner together. The workforce itself is changing dramatically in terms of its makeup. So in the past, the majority of the people who reported to a business were probably employees. Today, up to 40% of those in the United States, and probably close to that in other countries, are people who are not employees, people who have other relationships to the organization. And that's just a few of the things that are changing. And a lot of this is actually being somewhat held together by things like, for example, communication platforms like this. AI is becoming a bigger deal in terms of determining who gets hired, how much people get paid. And when you look at the overwhelming changes that are happening, what's literally going on is that some aspects may lose some of that humanization unless we literally and intentionally put that humanization back in.
Do you hear that, people? Don't let don't let the humanization get lost in translation just because we are talking, we are interacting in a different way, using remote tools, using different tools to communicate. I would rather have a conversation face to face because then you can see the intention, then you can hear me, you can hear the warmth of my voice, than writing a letter that can be consumed in a whole different way. So thank you, Joe, for sharing that. And Katee.
for me, it's because we're talking about humans. We need
Mm-hmm.
to humanize the workplace because we're talking
Yeah.
about humans. And we know all the facets, everything that Joe mentioned is spot on. I think it's also, as we think about how we interact with each other, before you pressed record, we were talking about bias, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit later as well. But we know we all have bias.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, the more we can have just communication that's clear, that's transparent, that's humanized, that is going to help all of us be more successful in the workplace. And it's also going to help organizations be able to drive more, better, different in their, how they're actually delivering for the bottom line, for those shareholders, all those great things. I think each one of us, when we think about where do we want to work, where do we want to actually put our passion, put our energy, it's in a company that cares about us as well. So it's not just a one-way street where we're a cog in the wheel of this large corporation. It's how are we actually able to contribute? How are we able to deliver on whatever the company needs? And how are they treating us in that process? How are we working with them, and how are we working together to achieve our goals? So I think we're talking about humans, so we should be humanizing the workplace. Real simple.
What I get from what you just shared right now is I'm thinking of people don't see the work relationship being a honeymoon, or when you enter the workspace, right? You are in this whole bliss of just being married and this honeymoon, but eventually it all fades away, and then you get to see the real thing, or you get to see the cracks or the little
Mm-hmm.
dimples or the little things that you did not see before because you were so blinded by all the goodness. And what do you do after this whole onboarding, right? What do you do to keep that relationship alive? How are you creating that magic? How are you tangoing with each other or dancing with each other to keep that chemistry alive? So thank you for sharing that. I really like that. And Kimberly.
So I think we need to humanize the workplace because I think COVID has taught us all that what we've been doing isn't
Hmm.
working,
Yeah.
and it comes down to like practical, fundamental human behavior. It never, it blows my mind that, we work 9 to 5, but kids are in school from 9 until 3.
Mm.
So who's picking the kids up from school? And like that's that level of humanization
The
of the workplace.
nanny.
But right, if you can afford one, or like, and it's right, all the presumptions that are made, and the structure of the workplace has just been so inhumane, and the hours that people are required to keep, or policies that make no sense. Like if you lose a loved one, you have 3 business days off. Well, you
Yeah.
better hope that your loved one dies on a Wednesday.
Hmm.
Like that. Like that makes no sense to me. If the person passes away on Monday, you got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then you have to go back on Thursday. Like that's so inhumane. And so, humanizing the workplace is a necessity, as both Joe and Katee have said, is that we're human, and we
Yeah.
have to recognize the humanity of our experiences in the workplace and make it more um, just conducive to real life. Like
You. Yeah.
simple as that.
You addressed something that really triggered me because I'm not disclosing who, but I was just having a conversation earlier on, just providing a listening ear to a friend of mine who lost a loved one. And even though it happened 2 months ago, she's still grieving, right?
Mhm.
So when you mentioned that you were talking about the 3 business days, and I'm just like, the last thing that you should go through is lose somebody, whether it's through COVID or through other circumstances, and not have the space to mourn, the space to grieve, the space to support them by maybe providing therapy, or maybe directing them to a coach so that they can go through this and process
Mm-hmm.
grief, because
Mm-hmm.
everybody processes grief in a different way, right? I
Mhm.
recently saw it's a weird thing that I should be saying his name, but I recently saw Kanye West's documentary where he lost his mom, and the way that he went through that, it's not how I would do that. But then again, everybody processes grief in a different way. So that's
Mhm.
why I want to say also hi to Amarachi. She's an amazing woman. And thank you also for Amarachi for being here as well. She's talking about being inhumane and sharing a lot of love already. But let's get into the nitty-gritty, right? Because you all said yes, being here today on a very special day, International Women's Day. It should be carnival. It should be celebrated all out, giving every woman, all women treats. But you're here. And Joe was brave enough to join the women as well. Let's talk about today, because the theme of today for International Women's Day is break the bias. And I would start with you, Katee. What bias are you hoping to break for this year?
So I think pay equity and just the idea around pay. And I know a lot of, there's a lot of jurisdictions that are thinking about pay and how do you discuss pay. And we know that women they carry this, the term I've heard before is kind of the baggage that they carry with them throughout their entire career, that, when they're offered a position that's, at the same level as a man, and the recruiter comes to them and says, oh, I'm going to give you 10% over what you made in your last role. And they go, oh, wow, this is great. That's awesome. Yeah. But it's 50% less than what the man is being offered for that same role. And so the bias that we have we need to know what your prior salary was. If we could break that, the change that we could make in people's lives and the way that we can actually affect women's lives, but also that downstream effect of how that changes the economy, how that changes so many different pieces. And it creates an environment, we're talking about humanizing the workplace. How many stories can we share of women who have seen salary data and you are completely disincentivized and you're like, why am I even here? I'm doing the same job or more. And, as Kimberly shared, I might be working different hours or whatever. I'm getting my work done though. Why am I being punished? And so just that bias around what their prior pay was, that's something for me that's really critical. And so every company I'm working with, the one I'm involved with right now as a chief people officer as well, we're being very transparent about this is the salary range. This is what the job pays. Not because of the legal ramifications that we know are coming through some of these jurisdictions, but because it's the right thing to do. And it is shocking to see how many women will say, oh, wow, that's a lot more than I'm making, versus the men who are like, I guess that's okay. And I'm, this is a completely, this is just a test case I'm doing. This is in no way, in a, it's just my own subjective test I'm doing. And it's interesting to see.
It's also interesting because when you brought up the bias that you want to dismantle, I was thinking about a post, I think a month ago or a few weeks ago, at least beginning of the year, there was this post about a recruiter being proud of the fact that somebody was asking, let's say a number, 80,000, and they could have easily asked for more. And I'm here like, okay, I understand that as a recruiter, you're working for the company, but isn't it also your mission, your job, for once somebody comes in, that you find ways to help make them stay? Help them go on beyond the job honeymoon, because once they found out, and to me, I felt ashamed about this recruiter sharing it online as it is just like that. And if I would have seen that, I was just like, first of all, you're telling my story, even though you're not mentioning my name, but it feels like you're walking all over me. And second of all, I feel like this recruiter and recruiters that behave like that should have done a better job, because it's not about luring people in. It's also about being accountable for those who are staying. What did you promise, and how can you help them to stay within the company? So yes, I like that. Thank you. Kimberly, what's your bias that you want to dismantle? Pick one.
Pick one, right? How much time do you have? I would say in the workplace, something that needs to really be looked at in terms of disparity to women in particular is looking at all the policies that unfairly treat women. So policies around family leave, policies around sick time off, and all the rest. Like there's so many considerations that could be made, and again, COVID has taught us that. But as people go back to the workplace, it seems as though everyone wants to go back to status quo. And I feel like there's just so many policies that could be looked at in terms of just how that could make women's lives a heck of a lot easier. So if we look at even just work from home, that would be wonderful if that could be an ongoing policy where people have that choice, because then it allows people room to live the rest of their lives and not have to make these hard choices between taking care of their kids or doing their job. no one should have to make that choice. Yet still, here we are. So I feel like a lot of the policies that are out there really disenfranchise women and force women to make choices that they don't want to make. Policies that impact, like, one thing that really grinds my gears is like when people look at a resume and they're like, "Oh, you have a gap." It's like, she had a kid. Like, that's not a gap. She created a person, sir.
And even so, you are allowed to take an absence of leave, right, and grow your personal journey, right? Yeah.
Right. And I'm personally, I'm not a mother, but I speak on behalf, because I have enough respect for mothers, where I've never understood that gap where it's like you're being punished for living your life, and you could take that gap and, travel or do whatever you want to do with it. But it's like, it doesn't make you any less competent. But it really unfairly impacts women, because if they have those gaps, that impacts their seniority and then opportunities that they have moving forward. So that's something that I would like to see dismantled moving forward, just because it makes no sense.
Yeah. I like that you have shared something, and also the biases that are against women, especially one that I shared this morning about the maternal war bias. It's the one that broke my heart the most, but it's also the one that inspired me to do what I'm doing now, to advocate for what I'm doing now, and to, in all fairness, there are women out there, or there are new parents, because I have to be more inclusive, right? There are new parents out there that if you bully them during their pregnancy, or if you harm them, you have to realize that you're not only impacting the new parent, but you're also impacting the unborn child. And this is something that I really want, the people, those in power, or those who are decision makers, to really understand that we need to do better when it comes to people in the workplace announcing their pregnancy or becoming new parents. We need to do better, because if the child is sick, it will impact the productivity of the parent, and that's not what you want. As an employer or as a manager, you have to find ways to make the workplace more welcoming, but also provide the tools that they can work from home. Because beginning of COVID, right, or I think halfway through COVID, a lot of women resigned from their jobs because of they were juggling too much. And we need all people, we need all workforces right now. So find ways to support them. And if you don't, well, let's say that your competitor will. Joe.
Well, the bias that I'm thinking about, I think links the two biases that were brought up by both Katee and Kimberley, because I think it's sort of one of the, let's call it one of our big operating biases. And that big bias is the illusion or the belief that organizations as they exist today just need a little tweak or a little patch in order to be effective for diversity and inclusive of women and inclusive of all the forms of diversity. The truth and the bottom line is that organizations today, most of the policies of how you reimburse people, how many days you can take off, what you can take time off, what holidays you celebrate, uh, things that impact childcare and other things like that, were all basically born around a time when there was a single white male who was working, and there was a stay-at-home mom who took care of everything else, right? And today, a lot of the efforts that organizations have in the DEI space are looking to, well, how can we include this other group of people, in our topic today, women, in this particular mechanism that we have? Or how can we make it easier for women to get into this mechanism we have? But I don't know how many of you are familiar with this. I might be dating myself a little bit here, but you're probably familiar with a book that was written by Dr. R. Roosevelt Thomas a couple of years ago, titled Building a House for Diversity. And in that book, basically, he uses this parable of a giraffe that builds this magnificent house and then decides to invite his friend who's an elephant to come into the house. He wants to be inclusive. He wants the elephant to be able to participate, but the elephant can't participate because the floors are too weak to support his weight. The halls are too narrow for him to move around with. And I think that most of the issues that women, as well as other people who do not fit into the mold of who the house was built for, are the same issues that the elephant face. The house was not built for anyone other than the giraffe, and everyone else is an elephant. So I think organizations today need to look not only at where they can put patches, but they have to look at the policies they have and the processes they have and all the other practices and ask themselves, are these adequate for the workforce that we want today that includes women? And is it a fix, or do we just need to come up with a new strategy because the strategy that we had doesn't scale? So everything from who gets reimbursed for what is another great example. Women cannot deduct, let's say, or even a man, because some men have childcare expenses too. They can't deduct childcare expenses if they
Yeah.
go, let's say, on a client meeting, but they can deduct a martini. And, we can make a strong argument that childcare expenses are equally or more important to some people being able to attend the meeting and be able to successfully drive production over a martini. So I think that bias, that it's just that we need a couple of patches to make it work for everybody else. I think that bias is the supporter of all the other pieces, because I think everyone's looking at the patchwork that can be done in different areas, when in reality, in some cases, what they need to do is raise the house and build another one that's for everyone.
I am in the meantime looking for things, and also my child and my partner are screaming all over the place because they apparently forgot that I have a humanized workplace episode. But never mind. While you were talking, Joe, it made me think of this quote by Albert Einstein: "Everybody's a genius." It's about a quote for asking a fish to climb a tree, right? Because this is what we're doing.
Mhm.
Right.
This is what we're doing. We think that by adding all these different ingredients that everybody's able to shine brightly like sugar, or shine brightly like pepper, or shine brightly like whatever ingredient that you have that you love to cook with. And this is what we are doing, not only in our education system, but also in the workplace, assuming that all the tools that we have in place, that it can help out everybody. It can help out the giraffe, it can help out the penguin, it can help out the elephant. But the only person that is able to climb at this moment right now is the monkey. But then again, we are asking for the impossible. So that's a thought that I was bringing up, and also coming back to Katee, because there is something happening in the world, or in the UK, where in the UK there are companies out there that when they have, I think, more than 250 employees, they have to they have to show transparency regarding pay. And I'm just thinking, like, well, why don't we do it global? Why don't we do it in Europe? Why don't we do it in US? Why don't we make it a global thing, so that we be honest? Because inclusion, I feel the way that I define inclusion is also adding transparency, sharing the pay level, being open about it, and the person then can ask for, okay, this is what I'm worth, and they can grow to become a senior, they can grow to become better. And this bot on Twitter is amazing, where they are sharing, if a company is celebrating International Women's Day, well, we have this thing from the UK where we are going to show how inclusive they are. And I like it. I like it. I love it. Love it. So, the other topic that I have for today, I asked the permission from a friend of mine, and I'm not going to share the literal words, but there are people out there that feel like when you're talking about women, we cannot include transgender women. And I'm also a bit appalled. Well, I'm putting things nicely. It makes my heart sad, because here we are trying to create a space where we want all women to be celebrated, and those who identify as a woman to be celebrated. And there goes a comment, a very harmful comment, not realizing that there are so many transgender women not being safe. Some even commit suicide, or some even are harmed, not realizing how hurtful that can be. So let's have a conversation about that, Kimberly.
Oh, where do we start? I mean, I'm on LinkedIn pretty regularly, and I choose my conversations very carefully. And this is a topic that comes up a lot, and it brings out a lot of vitriol.
Yeah.
And it's so disheartening for so many reasons, for all the reasons that you said. And the one thing I would challenge people to really think about is, you could know someone who's trans and not even know.
Yeah.
Right. So you don't know who you're talking to,
Yeah.
really. And if you don't know, that means that they probably are not comfortable telling you with good reason. Right. So I think we always have to, there's so many assumptions that people make to sort of get their harm out there. And it always has more to do with the person who's issuing the harm than the people who are being harmed, but it's still hurtful to hear. I don't know. There's so much to unpack with that level of thought and just how freely people feel to just say whatever, like they're commenting on the weather. It's just like, wow, that really just came out of your face. Like you actually said those words to me. And so those are the times where I just want to take my errands out and say, okay, let's do this. Because I'm like, you want to do a verbal sparring? Because you're not going to win. Not on DEI issues. And that's where with DEI, it's like, it's everyone. Like we have to be advocate. You can't just pick and choose, and cherry pick and say, these are the people that I'm going to advocate for, and these are the people who I'm not going to. Intersectionality. It's like the fundamental concept in DEI. Kimberly Crenshaw. People named Kimberly are very bright people. Clearly.
Are you what are you doing here? This is not part of the show. We are not self-promoting here. Just like I was listening, I was just like, what? No, all jokes aside, and I love you, right? So
oh yes. But just the fundamental concept of intersectionality, you can't negate that and say that you advocate for anybody if you don't understand that concept. Yeah. So the two ideas don't sit in my head. It's like you either you're in or you're out. That's really what it's about.
I totally agree. Last year I got into a whole thing. I did not disclose it last year, but let's say that I don't remember the word for it, but a fellow DEI advocate who is an advocate for the LGBT community, we got into a conversation, an online conversation about what is racism and what's not. And he felt the need to talk to me about me adding too much salt on everything. And I'm just like, this is blackfacing. Even though they haven't painted themselves, they are portraying as Mexican people sitting in lowriders, and you assume that that's not okay. Or am I only allowed to talk about Black issues? I don't feel like it, because I want to make myself accessible for everybody. And that means when I say that I'm a DEI advocate, I have to be there for everybody. Mm-hmm. Is that the way that I was brought up? No, because I challenge myself, especially when it comes to the LGBT community. My upbringing did not support that. But I unlearned and am still learning, and I'm providing a space for them, for my LGBT community, my friends, for them to speak up and educate me about what I can do to support that community. And I was baffled with the fact that, okay, your hurt is apparently better than my pain or the pain that I'm expressing. Why are we having a fight? Why are we having a fight about this? Why? Thank you, Kimberly, for highlighting that. Joe.
We were talking about this before we started the program. I think that one of the things that we're learning as we all collectively go on this journey, and this journey is a journey that started not that long ago, because a lot of people for years have lived within their own bubbles where they're experts on their own feelings. They're experts on what they think is right and wrong. And they seldom come into contact with anybody else who challenges that, because they're surrounded by other people like themselves.
It's a paperclip company.
Yeah, the paperclip company. Exactly. So now we find ourselves coming into contact with more and more people. And one of the things that we in this field, as well as people in general, need to recognize is that, there are a lot more perspectives out there and a lot more ways of looking at the world and feeling and so forth that need to be also acknowledged and respected. And the biggest change, I think, that all of us, whether we're in the DEI space or whether we're not in the DEI space, but just part of this, because this is a human evolution that we're going through right now, is we have to become experts at turning all of our exclamation points and bending them into question marks. So that rather than sitting there and saying, externally, my belief system and judging you through my belief system, instead turning that into a question and say, well, what does Vivian see the world that way? And why is it that, because I'm assuming that in your world, based on your perspectives and your upbringing, what you're seeing and how you feel makes sense to you, just like how I see the world makes sense to me. And if we could find a place in the middle where we can come together, then we can both grow, and I can learn something about your experience that will increase my appreciation, and you can learn something about mine. But I think that this is a new challenge for most people, because throughout most of civilization, we've lived in bubbles with people like ourselves. And our thinking process wasn't challenged because we all shared a religion. We all shared a background. We all shared a skin color. We all shared, and we all hid certain things or felt that certain things were good or certain things were bad. We're in a new era now, and we now have to be more open to that questioning and to being a little more metacognitive of what's going on around us.
Yeah. And also realizing that the comment that you are making, or I would say the verbal shittiness that is coming out of people, that I'm just like, did you really say that? Because if your child or somebody in your environment that you love dearly belongs to that community, or is maybe having a relationship within a different community, then how would you kick them out? How would you accept that? I can't do that. I cannot believe that. So I'm handing the mic over to Katee, because my mind right now is going in overdrive just by the thought of that. So Katee, regarding the comment that transgender women aren't women.
So I think you just kind of started to mention, and this is the one that drives me and drives me in my career, drives me in the work that I do around diversity, equity, inclusion, is thinking about the kids.
Yeah.
Thinking about, my niece and nephews.
Yeah.
Thinking about the children of my friends and other folks. And, right now, obviously in the US, we have so many things that are anti-trans, legislation going on in Texas and some of these other states. And, yesterday we just had another school shooting in Iowa.
Wow.
And so we're not going to protect our trans kids, and we're not going to make sure that we have any protections against them getting guns or bringing guns to school. So it's just this complete lack of empathy, of humanity. And those words that you're saying that you might think you're addressing another adult, but your kids are listening.
Yeah.
And your niece and nephews are listening. And so for me, just thinking about, when I approach any human, I just want to know them as a human and want to understand their experience and want to get to know them more. But I think about this work and the work that all of us are doing, and that all of us should be doing. So, even if you don't have that lived experience, even if you don't have, Vivian, as you're mentioning kind of that, hey, if you're part of the LGBT community, I can still be an ally. I can still be someone that is arm in arm with you. And how are we not acknowledging that, each one of us has a role in supporting the other, and each one of us has a role in making sure that everyone else is okay.
Yeah.
To say to a woman, you're not a woman because you're a transgender woman, what happens in that person's mind when they walk away from that conversation? The impact that you're having by saying that can be deadly, truly. Yeah. I mean, we know the stats, we know what happens. And to say that, like, again, is your child also hearing you say that? Is their school, friend hearing that? Like, all of those things that we're doing that just continues this cycle of inequity, of violence, of all of these negative things, we need to do better.
Yeah.
And so I just am very passionate about it from I want the next generation coming up behind us. And that doesn't mean little kids. That means, as we were talking about earlier about that recruiter that isn't helping the woman behind her to say, let me bring you up to where you should be pay wise.
Yeah.
What is the point? What is the point of that other than to hurt and harm? And I just don't, sorry, I get fired up too, Vivian. As you might
You're not the only one, because while you were saying, I'm just like, this is something that every recruiter, every company needs to hear about. Let's normalize and add some transparency, because why are you celebrating this thing while you are causing demonization, you are causing devaluation? And if you can lift somebody up, they will forever remember what you have done. Luckily, there are good ones out there, but still, it's unfortunate to see that. I see so many comments. So hi, Gurpreet, for being here. Hi, Raria, for also being here. Amarachi is saying hi. Pay equity. And Kristen is saying yes. Unfortunately, yes. I cannot say the name. I cannot do that. But there are people out there that are thinking that. So thank you. And Katee,
Kimberly's are the smartest. She said it. It has to be true. She said it here first.
Exactly.
I did spell your name wrong, Kimberly.
I think I need to end this broadcast because it's going left. It's going left, people. It's going left. Thank you, Kristen. And also this one I really love. Bend the exclamation point to question mark. Thank you.
Joe. I'm stealing that one.
We talked about breaking some of your favorite bias, at least deactivating or demolishing them for this year. We talked about the gender pay gap. We talked about how people feel about transgender women. What is something, and I'm going to let you pick one topic. We are going to have a conversation about that, each one of you. So what is a topic? Did I start with you, Kimberly?
You did, yeah.
Last time? Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, then I'm going back to Joe, just to provide an equal space. Joe?
Okay, sure.
What is a topic that you would like to address for this year for International Women's Day, just because you want to do better?
Yeah, just because. I mean, I think one of the topics that we need to address is the one that's the burning issue, equity. And equity not only in pay, but in all other forms and shapes of that word. As I mentioned earlier, organizations as they exist today were not set up for women to succeed. Simply not the case. They were set up for a man who had a wife who dedicated himself to work while someone took care of the entire emotional load and everything else that goes with bringing up a family in the background. And that just simply is not the world that we're in today. So we need to start looking at equity. So I think increasing diversity in organizations is important. I think inclusion is important, but I think equity is at the very heart of how you make the other two work. Because unless you change the shape of the house and unless you change some of those practices and policies, you can bring all the diversity in the world and they'll bump their heads against all the walls and they'll try to be included in processes that don't actually support what they need in order to get the work they need to get done. So I think that that's one of the areas where we really need to put a lot of focus.
I like that. I truly like that. And I'm going to bring an image in because a lot of people seem to think that equity means equality, right? So to share this in a good image, and I really love this image. There's also an image of a boy standing on a crate, but this image really highlights the difference. Equality, giving everybody the same bike, and know that I think I'm 6'2". I'm very tall as a woman, so I don't do well with the standard bikes, right? I need to have a bike for tall people. But then again, when you look at the equity part, you see that different people with different needs have a different bike to still be able to follow along the journey. Imagine within your workplace where maybe somebody is blind, maybe somebody's deaf, or maybe somebody needs extra tools to reach that certain level, right? What are you doing for them to move forward? So thank you, Joe, for mentioning that. And Katee, what about you? What's your topic that we need to address?
So I think it's the breaking the bias. And I think the one piece that I think we still need to address, and obviously even just the topic that you shared about the friend who was told she's not a woman because she is transgender, there is still so much bias that people, it's going beyond I'm aware that I have bias to how does that impact my everyday interactions with people? And what am I doing to change that? Because I think it took us a while to get to the place where people said, oh, wait, I have bias. And, we had that unconscious bias training was the thing. And it was like, oh, if you go to this 2-hour training, you're not going to have bias anymore, which we know is baloney.
Well,
I trained it myself.
Unless they had Olivia Pope on their training, right?
Right. That's right. Absolutely. Yes. But with that being said, it's okay. We have the awareness that there is bias, but how does that actually impact our everyday actions? How does that impact how we're interacting with other people? And so how do we break the bias truly? And, it goes back to Joe, what you were sharing on, we are biased to believe it's a 40-hour work week. We are biased to believe you should only take a few days if someone passes away, or that, hey, if you miscarry a child, you should just be able to go back to work the next day and everything's fine. Or you are biased to believe that every CEO should be a man. And, talking about diversity, it's not just diversity in the workforce, it's diversity in leadership, the folks that are making decisions, the folks that are actually saying, this is what we're doing as an organization. This is what we're focused on. So for me, it's going past the awareness of bias and actually truly making changes in your organization and in your personal life. Like we're on this journey in companies, but each of us is on a journey as well around how do we become more inclusive? How do we understand what's going on? And so it's breaking the bias that we have personally and understanding how that will impact our everyday interactions.
I love the fact that you are addressing a company is on a journey, but you also have to activate your own personal journey to do better. And a lot of the times people are waiting upon what's the company going to do? What's the manager going to do? What are you doing? You're not doing enough. And I'm just like, wait a minute. Have you looked into the mirror? Who do you see? What are you doing?
It's the whole idea also that like HR or the DEI team is going to take care of diversity for the whole company. And you're like,
they're not Olivia Pope.
It works. They
are not Harry Potter.
I want my white suit.
I love this quote. I love this quote from Barack Obama that I think that fits into this. We are the ones we've been waiting for, right?
Yes.
We need to do stuff. We need to change ourselves. And then collectively, when everyone does that, the world changes.
Yeah. I love that. Thank you, Katee. Kimberley.
Yeah.
So pick one.
One.
I know. I don't like one. That's not
right. It's very limiting. I would say one of the things that I would like to see change and an issue I would like to see addressed is how equity is. We wait until adulthood to address equity. If we rewind it back, if we look at how we're educating our children, and obviously having age appropriate conversations, because I know there's going to be some out there saying, I'm not talking to my kid about X, Y, and Z. I get it. Like certain conversations have to be age appropriate, but how we talk to our kids about points of difference, people who are different, how we explain that to them, for example, when I went back in the day, when I was at school, in elementary school, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but it'll come back in terms of, there was a student who had special needs. Nobody talked about what the student needed. They just thought, okay, put them in a classroom with all these, 10-year-olds and everything will be fine. Recipe for disaster. Because the children had not been socialized to learn how to support that student. And so that poor student got, they thought that they would be normalized and they would fit in and it would just be fine. And that poor kid just got bullied over and over and over again to the point where they just left school within like 2 weeks. It was like a 2-week window and it was over. And no one ever talked about that student ever again. And I remember thinking, why is no one talking to us about this? Like, what happened to that person? And so talking about, diversity, equity, inclusion, that starts in elementary school so that we don't have these adults who go into these workplaces with these ideas that are like hardened and baked in to their core, and then we're trying to like chisel them out. Like why don't we start earlier so that for all points of diversity, so that we can have more equitable workplaces in the future as the next generation. So we're not trying to do retrofits, things are just kind of built in from the beginning.
Yeah. While you were talking, I was just thinking about, I don't know if you watched, I think I watched too many Netflix, but I'm a person that I need to debrief or decompress while watching series or movies. But I was watching Raising Dion, where Dion, this Black kid, has a friend, Esperanza, who's sitting in a wheelchair. She is so courageous and so brave. And I'm just thinking, like, when was the last time that I saw a person who was sitting in a wheelchair, being themselves, being so powerful, being so advocate? Because the majority of the time when I see a person who has special needs or different abilities, they are being portrayed as we are the victim. We help us because we need your support. And here is a girl who is supporting Dion to be a superhero. And I'm just like, wow, my child is watching that. I'm watching that together with him. But it's also a different way of using books, using a special series or series that are portraying different people with different superpowers so that they can learn to understand this is how it should be, and not the yuckiness that we sometimes see in the workplace, where we think that somebody who's a circle should be put in a box that isn't catered for circles, right? So thank you.
No, we need to start just normalizing difference, right? Like, and just make it so normal that we're not questioning it every time.
Yeah.
So Vivian, I feel like I should be your quote master for today, because as Kimberly was talking, I remembered this quote from Frederick Douglass, and I just looked it up. It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And for the sake of this particular podcast, we'll change that to broken people. And I totally agree with what Kimberly is saying, because you have a 35 to 40-year-old person sitting in an unconscious bias class who has had all of these years of programming that result in, when they're stimulated a certain way, having a certain opinion or seeing the world a certain way, they're now a leader or a manager. And in a 2-hour class, we are attempting to dismantle all of these little rules and heuristics that they've developed. And ideally, then they're going to walk out of that room and they're going to be totally open, bias-free, conscious of their own biases. That's not going to happen. But if you start really early and you help children to recognize these things, you're going to have a better opportunity to build a better society in the future than the one that we have today.
Definitely. I refer to unconscious bias like it's a muscle that we need to train. So when you go to the gym, unfortunately, it doesn't happen magically, all these muscles and being slim and healthy, right? You need to do the work. You need to have a personal trainer, or you need to work out in a group setting where you train that muscle and hold yourself accountable. I'm not saying that every day you have to, hold yourself accountable, but create that commitment of 1 month. I'm building my muscle towards this is the action that I'm going to do, address the name of people in a correct way. And if not correct, you can easily leave a voice note and ask them, how do I pronounce your name? I want to do it right. How do I do that? So thank you, Joe, for sharing that. We are almost at the end. And there's one final thing, because I'm going to ask the question 2025. Well, we just started 2022. I've almost written off this year. But
It's only
well,
March.
we're still dealing with COVID
like-
and all the other yuckiness in this part of the world, right? Haven't you seen the news regarding Russia and Ukraine and the hurtful things that are happening here? And I'm just like, isn't it enough that we're dealing with this? And now on top of that, a person thinks that they have to let their ego run and do whatever it is that they need to do. So that's why I shared that. But what do we hope? What do you hope to see in 2025? Because today you shared your biases that you want to dismantle. We talked about International Women's Day. We talked about so many biases that women are facing. What is it that you want to see in 2025? I know it's almost 2.5 years or 2 years, but still. Katee.
A couple things. I want a woman in the White House. I want more women as international leaders across the board, kind of referring back to what's going on in Russia and other countries. Like, let's get more women in leadership and in powerful positions across the globe. And I think the other piece is, again, kind of that moving away from, and Kimberly mentioned this, like just normalizing difference. You know, that we are all different. We all come from different places, different experiences. And it's not you're diverse. It's you are just a human, and we are all bringing different things to the table, and everything should be celebrated from each individual. So, that is what I'll leave on the table. That's what I'll say for 2025.
Thank you, Kimberly.
For 2025, I'm an incremental optimist, I guess, in terms of just thinking this is going to be a very slow process. But I think, you know, for those who are listening and, you know, all the people who will watch this video down the line, what I would like to see is more people, individuals, just asking themselves when they enter a room, ask themselves, who's missing? Who's missing? You know, because you better believe, I mean, I'm trained as a Black woman, like I'm a professional Black woman. I you know, I know the deal. And I know every space I go into, I am doing a check to be like, who is in this room and who is not here and who looks like me and who does not. And it's just, for me, it's a reflex, right? It's also a safety related reflex. But I'd like more people who are allies of groups that they're not a part of to recognize and ask themselves when they go into a space, who's not here and why aren't they here? And how can we invite them in, you know? And that could be something as small or as small scale as, you know, your PTA committee. You know, it could be the boardroom, the C-suite. Who's not in the C-suite? Why do we not have any leaders with disabilities? Why do we not have any leaders who are women? Why do we not have any leaders who are women with disabilities? Like, come on, let's layer it. Let's be more sophisticated than this. So yeah, by 2025, if we can just change and ask that question, I think that would create a lot of change down the line.
While you were talking, I was also thinking about all these summits, all these conferences, all these speaker sessions, right? Manels. There are so many names out there where I'm just thinking like, okay, in this day and age, we have LinkedIn. We don't have the yellow pages anymore, but we have Google. There is Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. How many more platforms do we need to put out a quest? Say, I'm looking for different speakers. Just put it out there.
It's simple. It's so simple that it's hard.
Happen.
It's so simple, it's hard.
Yeah. Thank you. Joe.
So one of the things that I would like to see by 2025 is I'd like to see more of the DEI leadership in organizations at all levels begin to jump ahead from reacting to what's going on immediately and to anticipating what's coming at us. And the reason for that is because if you look at the speed at which everything is changing, and we started this conversation before we actually started the show. If you look at the speed at which everything is changing, where, it's exponential in terms of the use of AI in organizations. It was used to scan resumes. Now it's being used to actually perform interviews in some cases. And it's going to be used for increasingly more and more aspects of what used to be human type things. If we look at all those things that are going on, and we're talking about the biases that humans have, well, wait until you see the biases that these systems and these machines have. If
well,
we wait,
it's programmed with people with bias, right?
it's programmed with people with biases, trained by people with biases. It's a replication of the world that we lived in the past.
Yeah.
And if we do not get ahead of that now, while we're working over here on the problems that we have, new ones are forming in the horizon that are going to be upon us pretty soon. So my hope is that DEI leaders start becoming a little more of a futurist and looking at what's coming down the pike. What are the secondary and the tertiary effects of all these different changes, and what can be done now to make sure that that new world is more inclusive, equitable, and diverse than the one we're in right now, as opposed to letting it become a replica of the world that we work so hard to change.
I am there with you. I do have to add some reality, because a lot of the AI people that I talk to do want to do this, but they don't have the resources. They don't have the budget, nor the time, nor the energy. Some are doing it voluntarily. Some are being not paid enough. So people, managers, leaders, CEO, organizations, if you want to take DEI seriously and want to add it to your strategy, give it the budget that it needs to become a success. Give it the resources that it needs to become a success, because, again, we are not Harry Potter, nor are we Olivia Pope. We might sometimes act like Viola Davis, in How to Get Away with Murder. Because there are a lot of crime schemes happening in the workplace. But then again, this is real life, and we need to treat it as human as possible. So thank you all for being amazing guests and for being guinea pigs in this different way of having a conversation. But I really enjoyed the conversation, and know that if you have any questions afterwards, please share them, because this is a must-watch episode. And at least challenge yourself to commit to one action to deactivate or demolition one bias, and take that commitment to you for the whole year and work on it, challenge it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Until next time.
Bye-bye.
Please stay on, guests.